this episode of the Naturist Living Show, a tribute to Lee Baxandall, founder of the Naturist Society.
This episode of the Naturist Living Show is brought to you by Bear Oaks Family Naturist Park. At Bear Oaks, we offer traditional naturist values in a modern setting. Free your body, free your mind. www.bearoaks.ca.
On November 27, 2008, Lee Baxendall died after a long battle with Parkinson's disease. He was 73 years old. And I don't know if there are many people who've had more of an impact on the naturist world. And while it's always sad when we lose somebody, when somebody leaves this world, we're going to try to make this show a celebration of his life and all of his accomplishments and all he's done with regards to naturism. It was 1974 when the outline of what was to become the Naturist Society started to really take form. That was the year when there were official attempts to ban skinny dipping at the Cape Cod National Seashore. It was then that Lee Baxandall became very involved as a free beach activist. In 1976, he started the Free Beach Documentation Center. The documentations, communication, the sharing of information, that was something that was very difficult to do before the internet. We forget now in this age of information and accessibility for information instantly how hard it was for people who were interested in naturism to find information because they were fragmented all over the world. And so Lee, as a publisher, recognized the importance of having a central point to get information. In 1980, he started the Naturist Society and a magazine called Clothed with the Sun. Again, before internet, trying to find information, people depended on publications and magazine to get the basic info on naturism and what they're interested in. It became very quickly an important resource. It wasn't a light magazine. It was a magazine with lots of in-depth and philosophical articles. It's still today a fantastic magazine. He also published the World Guide to Nude Beaches and Resort, and that was the reference around the world for decades. You would find it in normal bookstores everywhere. It was a very well-published book. You could see Lee's experience in the publishing business. It was a beautiful book. It is a beautiful book with lots of pictures, lots of imagery that really illustrated naturism, and a guide not just of the private naturist clubs, but of open beaches, nude beaches, quiet beaches, and places where you could be a naturist without having to pay, without having to join anything. A guide to hot springs, not just in North America, but truly worldwide, full of information, full of guidance, full of guidelines. It had honest description. It was truly a guide, not just a directory. It provided all kinds of useful advice. In 1989, Clothed the Sun became Nude and Natural, which is the publication we know now, also known as N Magazine. Lee and the Naturist Society was very accepting and open-minded. He was really the first organization to recognize gays in the 1980s. He also recognized and accepted all kinds. He accepted singles, which was very unusual at the time. Most clubs were closed to singles. He was very aware of handicapped people, which was very unusual at that time. Those people were generally marginalized in society or ignored, and the naturist world, sadly, was no different. That put him at odds, unfortunately, with a lot of nudists and naturists at the time, but he certainly wasn't one to give up. In 1990, he started a Naturist Action Committee, which is still very active today and is very involved in watching the legislative activity of all the states and the federal governments in the United States, and acting and making sure that the interests of naturists and nudists in the United States are looked after. In 1993, he also started a Naturist Education Foundation. At time, all this activity certainly did put him at odds with AANR, known as ASA at the time, the American Sunbathing Association, today the American Association for Nude Recreation, who some members saw the Naturist Society as competition. Really, they had different views. ANR wasn't working very much on beaches at that time. They had little interest in fighting for nude rights outside of clubs, but that's changed, of course. Today, Anna recognizes the Naturist Society. Anna is very involved with beaches and legislation as well. But initially, there certainly was a little bit of conflict there. In 2004, in fact, AANR inducted Lee into the Nudist Hall of Fame. So it is with sadness that we learned in November 2008 of his passing. He had stepped away from the limelight and from really being involved in naturism because of his battle with Parkinson's disease. But it's still sad to lose such a pioneer and such a leader. The spring 2009 issue of N, or Nude and Natural magazine, is dedicated to Lee Baxendall's life, and I'd really encourage you to pick one up. It seemed to make sense, therefore, to talk to somebody from the Naturist Society, somebody who had been working with Lee from the very beginning, who knew him and who's still very involved in the Naturist Society, and that's Nicky Hoffman. So what follows is our discussion with Nicky about Lee and his impact on naturism. Nicky, you knew Lee a long time. How did you first meet him, and what was he like?
Well, I have known Lee since about 1981. I actually was invited. I wasn't working for him at the time, but in 1982, I was invited to go along on a cruise that he had invited his staff to go on, and they had one berth available, and I gladly accepted. I wasn't a naturist at the time. And during the cruise, Lee came to me and said, "Would you ever be interested in working for the Naturist Society?" And I said, "Well, of course, I would do that." And I went on the cruise, and I didn't get nude on the cruise. This was all new to me. It was all kind of curious. And now I look back at that, these 26 years later, thinking, why didn't I take my clothes off? Because I would have enjoyed the cruise so much more. But Lee was an interesting man, different in social settings than he was at work. At work, he was a stern taskmaster. He wrote one of the first jobs that I did was transcribing letters and things and he always used words that I didn't understand. So for years, I carried around in my wallet a little piece of paper with all these words on that Lee Baxandall had used, and I had to look up before I could type them. He didn't like it when you came to him with a problem. You could always go to Lee with anything, but if you went to him with a problem, you had to have a solution. It didn't have to be the perfect one. It didn't have to be one that would work, but you had to come up with something rather than just say, "Lee, this doesn't work." You'd have to tell him things that you think would work, and it's something that I try to do now in his stead, as I say, if you're going to bring me a problem, bring me your ideas on how we can solve the problem. And I think that's one of the things that I admired most about him was his ability to get people thinking and doing things. He was passionate about the Naturist Society, very, very passionate. He would make enemies because of the passion, because there was no gray area with Lee. It was either naturist or it wasn't naturist. So out there in the world of nudism, naturism, I'm sure along the way he made many enemies, but I've always felt, and I still do feel, that his idea was the right one. It's the right way to go about it. As a woman, I loved his philosophy on choice. I like my choices. I like to be able to choose everything I do. I like the clothing optional idea. I know that goes against a lot of nudist thinking, but there are sometimes, especially for a woman, that there are situations where you feel uncomfortable, and I would like to say that at age 60, I don't have any of those times anymore, but that's not true. There are some people that make me uncomfortable. I'm uncomfortable around them with clothes on, so I would be uncomfortable around them naked. But that is one thing I admire about Lee. He never forced anybody to do anything. He was a prankster, great prankster in the office. He would pull tricks on us in the office all the time, but he was a very good boss, and I think his love of naturism was true from long before he started the Naturist Society until the day he died.
So what drove him? Why was he so passionate about naturism?
Because somebody told him he couldn't do it. I really think that his son said it very well. I wish I could quote him right now, but in his eulogy, Phineas said, Lee was an activist, and he was passionate, and they were on the beach in Cape Cod, and people were trying to tell him that he couldn't recreate there in the nude, and it just didn't make sense to him. And I think, I still understand that same thought process within him. It's like, this country is surrounded by water, and we can't have like a quarter-mile section of beach ever so often that people could be nude. It's beyond the realm of thinking, and that's what it was with Lee, is that was he felt that it was his right to be able to go nude as long as he wasn't out there offending anyone.
So now that he's gone, what's the future of the Naturist Society? Where will things go from here?
Well, I hope the economy turns around so that we can continue the Naturist Society in the same way that Lee wanted it to be. He wanted the Naturist Society. He was hoping that we would be so successful that there would be no need for the Naturist Society, and I don't think we've gotten there. So I'm hoping that we can continue to lead it on that journey to when we will no longer be needed.
You talk about money. Was a Naturist Society a business for him?
Yes and no. It should have been a business, but it was his passion. He had the other company, the workforce communication, that was a business, but his passion was the Naturist Society. I think you can't not have it be a business of some sort. You have to pay bills, and you have to. But he wasn't concerned with deadlines and doing things. He moved to his own drummer. He always did.
Was he pleased with how things turned out with the Naturist Society? He wasn't very involved in the last few years.
Well, I'll tell you, I got emails from him. In fact, the first issue that I did as editor, he wrote me a nice little email that said it was one of the finest issues that the Naturist Society had ever produced, and that did a lot. It made me feel really good that, okay, I'm doing what you wanted me to do. I think times are changing. If you look back at the earlier Sons and Closed with the Sun, there was a lot of controversy in there, and I think that was at a time when that worked. But I think there's so much controversy now. We fight so many legal battles that I don't think we need to have controversy in the magazine. I think telling people the joys of naturism and the history and the travel opportunities, and we have enough controversy telling them, we're fighting for this beach or that I don't think that we need to have anymore. So yes, I think that he's pleased with the direction that it's going in.
What do you think you miss most about him now that he's gone? What do you wish he was still here for?
His counsel at all times. I mean, asking for advice from him or not, you got it, whether you liked it always or not, but he gave you the truth, and I miss that. I miss thinking, because I'll be working on something, and I'll go, I wonder what Lee would think of this. So that's always in the back of my mind, and I will try very hard to hold to the same principles that he held to. He often disagreed with other magazines about things that they sold or videos that we might question, things like that. And I would hope that I would maintain the Naturist Society in the family-oriented organization that he founded. I'd say 9 times out of the 10, the man was right. It would be proven that his thoughts were the way it was supposed to be.
Lee focused the attention of the Naturist Society more on naturist rights and free beaches and hot springs, something which had been largely ignored in the past. How did Lee feel about the club nudists?
I think that Lee thought that having the Naturist Society and another organization was not a bad thing. I think that, as I was trained, like I said, I was trained at the knee of the master. I think that we can't, no one organization can do everything. I don't think that you can do justice. If you're fighting to save beaches and then you have this organization of clubs, I think you spread yourself too thin, and I think he felt that way too. So I don't think that he ever thought that the organizations should merge, that one should cease to exist. I think that he always felt that there was a need for two organizations.
I also called Mark Storey, who worked for many, many years with the Naturist Society, and he knew Lee pretty well. And I asked him to tell us what was Lee's impact on naturism.
Lee Baxandall did indeed have a huge impact on the naturist and nudist movement here in North America. I was privileged to get to work with him for a number of years with N Magazine, as a writer, co-editing, and just hanging out with him. I was in Oshkosh doing some work. I think different people could say different things, but I'd like to point at three different things, three different ways I think he personally impacted naturism in North America, himself or through the Naturist Society. First would be inclusiveness. Constantly spoke for inclusiveness in both club and public land settings for social nudity, naturism. That is, he said, naturism is for everybody, straight and gay. Men and women, yes, but of all ages, not just the beautiful, not just the elderly, the young, everybody. He encouraged various races to get involved with naturism, whether you're gay or straight, black or white. It was going to be something for everybody. And this seems totally obvious to us now, but it really wasn't that way all the time. I think many nudists, vast majority, I think, were thinking in terms of inclusivity. But Lee wanted it to be part of policy. It should be part of a national and local club policy that unless you're a troublemaker and you're a human being, you should be allowed in as part of the group. The second thing I think he really emphasized was public lands. Most nudists were interested primarily in their clubs, which is fine. His primary interest was beaches, hot springs, free-range hiking out in the wilderness, primarily beaches. And he wanted to make sure that they were preserved from legal attack. He wanted to make sure that new sites could be established for family-friendly clothing optional nude recreation. And his heart did seem to be on public lands. And that has been a huge shift. There was just nothing on public lands from the 30s up through maybe the 70s. Yes, there were people skinny dipping all over the place on public lands, but no organization and no group that seemed to care much about them. So he's really shifted all national organizations in North America to have a strong, at least apparent interest in public lands. The third thing I think he did was really to drive home the importance and value of dramaturgy, particularly in grassroots activism projects. We could take a look at some people, the great grassroots activists like Gandhi or King, fighting social injustice, kind of pushing the envelope, doing what has to be done to make the world a better place for many people. What I think Lee did was he said, yes, continue to do that, but inject humor, inject art, inject kind of a joyful lightheartedness into it so that you can actually push forward in defending and promoting nude recreation in North America, but you can do it in a way that might put a smile on someone's face. So rather than protesting, I think he encouraged me personally to get creative and think of a fun, artful, lighthearted way of working with a legislator, of working with a group on a city street, of working with other grassroots activists, of creating a film, of creating a play. This concept of dramaturgy, though he didn't invent it, really seems in my mind to just kind of encapsulate Lee's whole approach to pushing forward the promotion and defense of nude recreation in North America.
It seems to make sense that we give the final word to Lee Baxendall. So here from the introduction to naturism video called Celebrate the Freedom by Michael Coney is an interview with Lee Baxendall.
The roots of naturism for the United States are both native and foreign. native, it's what we call skinny dipping, and it's something which came with moving into a continent where the original natives seldom wore clothing when they didn't need to, and where they certainly didn't swim wearing any clothing. The original natives of Wisconsin were described by the first voyageur priests who came here as running around in nothing but moccasins, and we should keep that in mind. So skinny dipping is the native heritage, and as that was progressively lost over the years, we began to look to Europe, where nudity was rediscovered as a social attribute, a social value, after a horrendous experience of urban dankness, urban oppression, crowding, industrialism. By the end of the 19th century in Europe, you had a terrifying psychology of living in cities where people would do anything to get out into the countryside on the one day a week they were given off. They formed the Wandervogel movement in Germany, and in France and Italy there were comparable movements. Doctors began prescribing sun and air baths, and the naturist or movement, as we sometimes have called it in the United States, the nudist movement, but the naturist movement in Europe was born by the end of the 19th century as an antidote to civilization. And it has gone on with great strides from there. Naturism is an antidote to urban crowding in the sense that it restores us to ourselves, to a human being which has been taught by advertising and marketing that you have to wear clothing to be anybody, to be somebody. Without clothing, we're told by the marketers, we lack status, we shouldn't be comfortable, we smell, we don't have an ideal body, so we should cover it up. And all of these are attitudes which perhaps assist the corporate bottom line, but they don't assist our human self-respect and our ability to be calm and happy people for the lifetime given to us. So naturists seek a remedy to civilization in the sense that civilization has turned dangerous. We, in fact, would insist that naturism is itself a civilized characteristic, and indeed a country which lacks nude beaches is not a civilized country at this time in history.
This episode of the Naturist Living Show was brought to you by Bare Oaks Family Naturist Park. Traditional naturist values in a modern setting. Traditional values means that naturism is more than just taking your clothes off. It is a life philosophy with physical, psychological, environmental, social, and moral benefits. Bare Oaks Family Naturist Park strives to promote those naturist values in a modern setting that provides the amenities and services that our members and visitors expect. Free your body, free your mind. Learn more at www.bareoaks.ca.